And then I went to the RCM and I started hearing my fellow students play, and it's just a whole new world of not just repertoire, but like technique as well, and the way that you're taught to play in conservatoires.
I've had such a great time exploring the music of today's guest. We are chatting today with Nina Harries, who's a compelling force in the creative arts. She's exploring new territory with the bass and vocals in such an interesting way. She recently launched her debut album in an event along with harpist and vocalist Ellie Ford, and she's written several extremely groovy solo pieces that are up on YouTube. Icarus and The Clown Song come to mind, and we'll feature excerpts from both of those in today's episode. Nina and I talk about the experience of feeling like a duck out of water, her first 2 years at the Royal College of Music, finding her groove by combining the voice with bass, and she's got a great story, kind of an aha moment, which I love those, exploring a variety of bands and creative projects while in London, her last couple of years at the RCM, and the circumstances that led her to join the Akram Khan Company and this fascinating project which we talk about, which she's been involved with for the last 2 years. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. And I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Modacity, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, Steve Swan String Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, Nkoda, that's spelled Nkoda, Colstein Music, and A440 Violin Shop. More on them later, but here is the endlessly fascinating Nina Harries.
Sometimes he flies so high that even the birds up in the big blue, they cannot follow him in any way at all.
Wow. So congratulations on getting this album. You must be all recorded with the album, or are you still working on it? Or
Yeah, actually, we actually finished it 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I got a job immediately after we finished it, and it was quite a demanding one. So I just kind of didn't have any space in my head to launch, self-release. So I was like, I'm just going to put this off for a bit. And now it's 2 years later, and I'm like, oh, okay, probably need to do it now.
Well, that's how it goes, though. And I mean, people probably underestimate the amount of time and effort. I mean, I can't even, the only thing equivalent to that is I put together this book back in 2016. And I thought, oh, no big deal. This will be easy. It took so long. And it made me realize I need to think long and hard about, because it's just a lot of work. And I can't even imagine.
Is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my friends have done like album releases and things, and they all warned me individually, they were like, it's going to be a lot of work, it's going to be really stressful, it's going to be really difficult, and I was kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. But now I really know what they mean. So
and
yeah.
The job you got was with the dance company, right? It
was.
Am I pronouncing it Akram Khan? Is that the?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, so that's a super interesting project. And then everything I've seen online of you, I've encountered your videos before. That Preservation Hall one in particular, that has popped up.
Yeah.
I don't know, shared with me or just searching on YouTube. So and then that sort of sent me down a rabbit hole, and I checked out everything else I could find. So your solo playing is super interesting. And then, I go to your website and just your whole backstory and studying classical music. That's super interesting, and your background. So we probably have like 9 episodes we're going to have to do over the next few years. So
Yay! That's a great idea.
I don't even know where to start. Maybe can we just talk about your background? You're from a musical family. Just tell us about your early years.
Yeah, my whole family are musicians. My dad was the professional performer, and then my mum is a professional music teacher. So she does a lot of like early years, like babies to well, we call it year 6 here. I don't know I don't know what age that is, and I don't know what you call that in the US. But
people will. I don't know, but I'm sure some folks will know. They'll let me know.
Yeah, and my brother is now a professional musician as well. And my sister could have been, but she's the black sheep, so she decided to do something else. So she's the only one. And I quite like the fact that in our family, the black sheep isn't a musician.
Yeah.
That's quite ironic. Yeah. And it was amazing, really, just growing up. It's just all around. Every room, there's at least 3 or 4 instruments of varying damage levels. And yeah. I didn't really realize when you're young, you just kind of take that stuff for granted. But now I see like how lucky I was to grow up in that kind of environment, because it's definitely allowed me to at least feel a lot of freedom in what I do. And now my dad and my brother are going to be in my band for this album launch. So it's all kind of coming together.
Okay, wow. That's so different from my family, which were all non-musicians, although my extended family had musicians in them. But yeah, I've often thought about what that experience must be like. Like I played for years in this chamber festival with a family. The dad plays in the Lyric Opera of Chicago. He's a cellist. His wife teaches violin to dozens or many students and coaches chamber music. And all of the kids went into music. And I mean, I remember seeing the youngest one when he was like 7. He's just like surrounded. They're playing chamber music together. And what an interesting. Was there any thought of doing anything else for you?
Well, he used to, as in not music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a very like outdoors streak in me. None of my immediate family have that. So I'm the only one that got that gene. But I'm a big horse fan. Well, I was. So I considered kind of going into either racing or eventing or some kind of equine job.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
But it was always in the bones to be a musician, I think. So I couldn't escape it.
Now, I've got a question, because I live in a very urban area right now, and I love the outdoors too. And I grew up in a much more, it's not rural, but I could get out to nature really quickly. Where are you living right now? Are you in London, or are you?
Yeah,
okay.
Most of the time I spend in London, but I leave as often as possible.
Okay, because that's what I live in San Francisco, very different city than London, and I hopefully I'm going to get to London next year, but I never have been in the past, so I don't know how it is there. But do you feel is it easy for you to get out into nature when you're in London, or is it just city as far as the eye can see?
It is a huge city, but I think because I went to San Francisco last year with the show. Mm-hmm. And actually, no, it was this year. And I think in the US cities, because of the way your buildings are, it's not quite as, because you have all those really tall buildings, right?
Yeah.
And we only really have like one bit of London where all the skyscrapers are, and then the rest of it is more like house kind of buildings. Mm-hmm. So you do feel less kind of urbanified than you do in like a city like San Fran or like New York. Yeah. But if you drive, you can get out. It's quite easy. You can just pedal down once you're out of the motorway.
Yeah.
And then you can go anywhere you want.
Okay, that's it. It's interesting because so you've been to San Francisco. That's super cool.
Yeah.
I've only lived here for 5 years, and before that I lived in Chicago. I don't know if you found yourself to Chicago.
No, we're going next year though.
Okay, well, it's a very different city. Chicago, yeah, it's a very cool town. Happy to give you some recommendations for things to do when you're there. But that's a city where you can drive for, I guess, kilometer after kilometer, and I mean, you could drive for an hour, and there's no nature to be seen. You know, it's just city for forever. And it's on a lake, which would be called a sea in any other country. It's very large, so there is the waterfront. But I would sort of go stir crazy for nature in that town. Here in San Francisco, in the town, there's a little bit more nature kind of baked into the town itself, and then you can very quickly be out of the city, and you can be seeing horses. Isn't it?
Like the bays. They're not that far away. Yeah.
So I can sort of scratch that nature itch a little bit easier here than I could in Chicago. But you've got, and I'll link up to your website and everything so people can read this, but you've got a wonderful, it's like the best description of kind of feeling maybe like an odd duck in music school. You went to RCM, and can you just talk, I think I wrote down a couple of phrases, like imposter thinking, practice, impostor syndrome, practice guilt. I think you got up there. Just talk about how, because I think so many people can relate to that, and what you're doing now seems to me to be so different from what many music schools would be selling.
Advising you. Yeah.
So just talk about that experience.
Yeah, it was a real minefield, I should say, for me coming to the RCM, because I came from kind of Northampton, the town I come from. It's a very big town, but obviously there's not that many double bass players in there. So it's very much that kind of being the big fish in a small pond, going to big pond and algae. And that was kind of what it was like for me, because I was principal of the Northampton County Youth Orchestra, and I thought I was good. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm great at the double bass. And then I went to the RCM and I started hearing my fellow students play, and it's just a whole new world of not just repertoire, but like technique as well, and the way that you're taught to play in conservatoires, very much looking into solo playing. And I never knew I did one Botticini piece to do my grade 8, because you have to do something like that to do these exams. But I had no idea about that the instrument could be a soloist in a classical sense. I always knew about it in a jazz sense from watching my dad play and stuff. But yeah, that was and I felt like I was the last one in on the joke. Like everybody knew everything. And I was just some kind of like weird goth punk kid who didn't know anything about classical music and was like, oh God. And I think the imposter syndrome thing, it's a really big deal. And I do kind of wish that we'd all shared it a bit, our feelings about it at the time, because you always feel you're alone in that. I really did. I really felt like I was the only one in the whole conservatoire who felt like that. But now I'm starting to realize that might not be the case.
I think a lot of people feel that way, even if they don't appear to feel that way on the outside, right? I know that feeling so well. I come from, I'm sure it's not the exact equivalent of Northampton, but I come from a town, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is about 100,000 people or something like that. Many, many hours from any big city. And then I went to school in Chicago, and I remember we get there, and one of the conductors is there and introduces me, and my dad is with me. And my dad basically says to the conductor, look, he's a really big deal back in South Dakota, but not so much in Chicago. So yeah, thanks, Dad. And was your dad is a bass player?
Yeah, he
is.
I learned everything I know from him.
Wow.
I don't know half the stuff that he knows.
Were you singing from a young age too, or when did you start singing? Has it always been?
Yeah. Okay. Singing was something that I did from the word go, I think. It was always like, my mum is a singer, my brother is a singer. It so turns out that my dad is actually a singer, but he just kept it a secret from us all for like 40 years. But my mum is very much into choirs. She runs a few choirs, and like she takes part in other choirs back in Northamptonshire. And when I was growing up, she really encouraged me to do as much choir as possible. And that was like church choir first, and then school choirs and all sorts. So I was singing from the beginning, really. Whereas double bass, I found it really late. I think I started playing in 2011, maybe.
And you started school in 2012, right? Or are there? Am I? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh no, I must be wrong. I must be wrong then. I think it's 2009 I started.
Okay, but not many years before then going off to RCM.
No, definitely not enough. Yeah. Okay. Definitely not enough.
Right before you went off to do you call it college? I'm always fascinated by the little differences between, you know, us folks here in the States and people in the UK.
Oh yeah, because all of them are college in the US, isn't it?
Yeah, but then
whereas this one is college because it's the Royal College. And then but usually we would call it something else.
Okay, yeah, no, it's always curious to me because then we have university too, and then we have conservatories, but then some colleges will have a conservatory, and then some universities will have a conservatory, but not all will. And then I know, exactly. It's just tube. So I'm sure that if you could go back to like 17-year-old Nina, what you're doing right now is, I don't know if you probably wouldn't be predicting you're doing, or maybe you would be predicting. Like, what were you thinking you would be doing down the road, right before you went off to college?
Well, just before it was when I'd started. So you go to the school before you get in, and you know you meet some people and you see what everyone there's already doing. And I think I went to a masterclass, one of the double bass master classes, and I heard these guys playing, and I was like, oh my god, I didn't know it could sound like that. And I think I really got wrapped up in or whisked away by the I don't know what the word is, that allure that those institutions have, you know, especially orchestra as well. It has a very because it's such an old and cherished thing, and it still happens now, and it's quite magical in a really weird way. You know, like the look on a person's face when they see an orchestra for the first time, it's just like unbelievable, you know, like they just can't believe what it is that they're seeing and hearing. And I think it was a bit like that for me, so I really got whisked away by the idea of being a classical bassist, which up until doing the auditions wasn't my life's dream. You know, I was thinking about horses and listening to the Velvet Underground most of the time.
Nice.
So I was never like your classic kind of dedicated orchestral musician. But I thought, oh hell, maybe I can do this. You know, I might look weird, but maybe I can like tone it down a bit and like fit in and do all the excerpts. But I very quickly realized that once I got there, I started to realize that really wasn't gonna work for many reasons.
I can't. It must have been shocking and probably more than a little frustrating. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. Whether resetting your soundpost, installing a new bridge, or giving your fingerboard one of their precision dressings, the Bass Violin Shop will work with you to improve your setup. They also specialize in resetting necks, repairing cracks, installing new fingerboards, and new bass bars. Whatever your playing needs, they will listen carefully to you and work hard to get the most out of your instrument without blowing your budget. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. How is it that Upton Bass came to design a bass for Gary Karr? Well, it all started with an email. Here's Eric and Gary from Upton Bass on how this happened.
Gary was at kind of the forefront of ergonomics in commissioning different bass makers to make ergonomic models to his playing style. And he basically replied. He said, yeah, but you know, here's what I'm looking for. I want something, you know, that's this, and this.
He sent us sketches.
And by the way, I want it affordable that anyone going to my Karr camp could afford it.
This model has become so popular, and Gary Karr even played it for the 50th anniversary International Society of Bassists convention. He was the opening, he gave the keynote speech, and he played 2 beautiful selections on his Upton bass, his Karr model Upton bass. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And you know, there's a lot that goes into being a bass player beyond that initial purchase of a bass. We need bass bows, we need bass covers, we need stands, we need new strings, pickups, wheels, quivers, upgraded gear like tuning machines, end pins, repair parts, all of that. And when someone's looking for some new bass gear or to upgrade something on their bass, I send them to Steve's shop. He's located just south of San Francisco in the Bay Area, and he is the largest dealer in basses between Los Angeles and Canada. That is a big distance, folks. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com. And thank you so much, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast. I in doing some research, you heard a piece that your teacher, and help me with your teacher's pronunciation.
Ennocent.
Oh, okay, great. So he was performing a piece with soprano and bass.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Changed my life.
Okay, talk about that.
Oh, it was amazing. Well, I started studying with him. I had to kind of convince him to teach me because at that point I was quite early on in my studies and I was still French bow and he was German bow. And I was like, look, I don't know what it is, but I really feel like you're the teacher for me. Please, will you teach me? And I had to come back to him like 3 times. And eventually he agreed. And I was very much starting to get interested in contemporary music at this point because I'd realized by that point, I was like, I'm not really cut out for the big full-on symphonic sound. I don't have that, and my bass definitely doesn't have it. So I started getting really interested in contemporary music, which is his specialism. He plays for the London Sinfonietta and some other contemporary ensembles. And he invited me to this gig that he did at this venue in Camden. And I thought immediately, I was like, it's in Camden? And that's so cool. Okay, great. And I went to see him play, and it was like with this group called the Riot Ensemble. And they were doing lots of different pieces with like small like chamber pieces. And the reason he invited me was because he knew that I was a singer as well. And he was like, we're going to do a double bass and voice piece. And I was like, oh, wow, imagine that. Imagine like, and a scored one as well. Not just like a pop song, but like a piece. And we went, and it was this piece called Yes, I Said Yes, I Will Yes by Amy Beth Kirsten. It's actually, the Departure duo that you interviewed.
Yeah.
It's on their table that they've got. And I was like, yay, I know one of them already. But it was amazing. I mean, because at this point I just started to experiment with bass and voice myself. And I was really convinced that it can be done in a more classical way rather than a jazz, like Esperanza Spalding is doing it with the jazz thing. But I was like, I know it can be done in a weirder way than that. I just know it. And I went to see them do this piece, and it was obviously for 2 separate people. But I remember that from the first note, I was like, right, I can't quite sing like her because she's a proper, classically trained opera singer. But I was like, I could do this piece. I just knew it. And it was the first time in my 4 years at college that I felt like I could do something, like I was capable of something. Mm-hmm. And I went to him afterwards and I was like, can you get me the score for that? And he was like, yeah, really? You sure? You sure about that? And I was like, yes. For the first time in my life, yes, I'm sure. I've still got it. I look at it every time I go away now. It's my trying to keep my chops up to scratch.
How cool is that? That's the piece. I love hearing stories where there's like a thing or a moment where things just like boom, and you actually physically have it. That is so cool. Talk about tackling that. Was it crazy? Was it crazy hard? Did you spend hours digging into it and trying to figure it out? Did you practice the bass part alone and then sing? Because I do a few talking and playing pieces. Nothing on the level of what you do, but even that I find that's like a wacky dance to kind of figure out.
It's so hard. Yeah, it's so difficult to get your brain around it. Mm-hmm. I remember he gave me the score, and he advised me straight away, because he knew all my bad habits, which were like rushing through things and not really looking very analytically. And he was like, okay, if you really want to do this, let me just give you one piece of advice, because I can't advise you about anything else other than the bass part. Just look at one page, and if you can do the first page, then we'll try the second page, you know. Because he was really, and I totally understand why, because once I got the score in front of me, it was a bit of a like, wow, okay. Okay then, right, all right, okay. And you do have to practice them separately. Mm-hmm. If not just because, like, there's a certain amount to sing in that way, you need a lot of air and a lot of, like, quite concentrated air, because it's quite high too. Because I'm not like your classic soprano, I'm probably more of an alto, to be honest. So to sing that high and in that properly, like, clean tone, you need to have a lot of air and, like, really well supported. And the posture for playing the double bass is, like, basically the opposite of that. So that was quite a challenge. I found myself like I could sing the vocal line, but then once I tried to change my posture to be double bass playing posture, it would change. I'd run out of air too quickly and things like that. And also the polyrhythms in that piece there are some very odd moments of relationships between the notes, between the two staves. And I had to get about 9 different coloured biros and just draw all the lines between all the notes that happened at the same time, or like in a fair, like a simple time relationship, rather than strange 4/5/9/11 kind of things. And they ended up look like the whole score just looked like a rainbow. But Enno loved it because he's a big fan of writing on things. So he was like, that's a really good idea, actually. I was like, yes. And I just worked at it for about 2 years, I think.
Wow.
My last 2 years at college, that was the only thing I really wanted to do, was that piece or others like it, but I couldn't find any like it. So I'm endlessly grateful to Departure Duo. I can't wait to check out some of the rest of their stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure you can quite identify with what they're up to. It's really been interesting going through that. And
I love it.
Folks who haven't listened to that, I'll make sure to link to that. But they have a database they've been putting together and continue to put together of soprano and bass music, and there is quite a bit. So that's like a whole new world opening up and now those last 2 years, you also started playing with other groups too, right?
Yeah,
isn't that kind of when things start? Yeah. So you get to music school. This is a really cool path. So I just want to make sure I get all the steps. Okay, you get to music school. What the heck is this world? All these people are shedding Bottazzini, and I was hot stuff back home, but now I'm discovering. You work through that frustration. You hear this piece, you get obsessed with it. You start figuring it out and going through it. Had you played around with bass and singing in the past before? Had you done any just improvisations before, or had you experimented?
I'd started before I went to college. When I was about 16, I realized that I'd quite like to do something solo, and I had that like kind of urge to perform alone. So I tried doing the whole singer-songwriter thing with a guitar, because at this point I hadn't started learning the double bass. And I quickly realized that there was literally, it's been done so many times, and there's nothing special that I can add to that, you know. And my guitar playing is atrocious, so I quickly realized that wasn't going to be the way to go. And then I don't really know how it occurred to me. Just kind of, I started playing the bass, and I thought I really would love to do this in a singer-songwriter context rather than being in a band. And it just started. So once I went to London, and I was slowly getting the hang of how to play the double bass, but I mean, it was very, very slow, because as I previously mentioned, I got a practice phobia. So I probably could have got a lot better, a lot faster, but I just didn't do any work. So that's if you're listening, kids, that's what happens. If you want to be good, you just have to work for it. There's no way around it. And I started doing like pub gigs in London, like weird, like open mic kind of they pay your tube fare. You lug a double bass all the way there and play to an empty room. I think I must have done like 30 of those. Thinking back to it, God, it's terrifying.
Oh, so for gigs like that, so, would you just get up there and improvise, or were you singing? Were you doing covers? What were you doing up there?
My original idea for it was because I've always been quite interested in like stand-up comedy and poetry and that whole improv world. So I used to do, when I very first started, is I had like a kind of set of about 5 riffs that were quite jazzy or like funk-ish, and I just looped them because they were easy enough that you can just leave your left hand doing what it's doing and you don't have to think about it. And then I'd improvise lyrics. And for me, that was, at the time, I can't comprehend how I did it now because I could never do that now. But back then, if anyone asked me about it, I'd be like, it's easier. I can't think of anything like set in stone. I'd rather just get on stage and see what happens. And my dad used to come to my gigs and literally be like, "Oh, what is she gonna say? Like, why don't you just write a song like a normal person?" And eventually I got to the point where I was like, oh no, actually maybe I should just write some songs so that I can make them up every time. Yeah. You do weird stuff when you're young, that's my excuse.
I can't even imagine getting up there and singing with my bass at all, but especially to like come up with lyrics on the spot. What a fascinating
It worked as well. That's the amazing thing. It's like I remember sometimes I'd come out with a line and it would rhyme with the previous thing and be like super relevant as well, rather than not like scat, like actual words. And I'd be like, wow, I wish I could write this down, but I'm too busy now.
But
I wish I could do that now. That part of my brain, whatever it was, I definitely burned it out completely in those 2 years.
It's interesting though, because I wonder how that must have had an effect on what you're writing now. Because I noticed I've gone through. So you got that better when you're back, babe, right? That's one that you got up online right now, and then that clown, the clown song, that super fun performance. I showed my wife that that performance last night. It's so fun. You're a great your theatrics on the stage are really wonderful. That is all at this point. You've written all that out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because like Icarus, you've got that. And I want to talk about the art book, which is also really interesting. But like Icarus, I saw you've got all those lyrics written down. So, but your bass riffs, there is a loopiness to them. You know, whether it's like the pizzicato, the harmonic pizzicato, or you've got like some funky arco grooves on the clown song.
Yeah.
So those early improv pub gigs, maybe it seems like they must have had an effect on what you ended up writing.
I think so, definitely, because it also gives you a chance, especially because I wanted the bass and the voice to have quite equal parts in it. Mm-hmm. But I think the voice always, the double bass is always taken over by something. I find it's one of its kind of most like modest parts of the double bass is that it's always kind of going, oh, okay, don't worry, you go first. Like, oh. And the voice always seems to kind of take over in a certain state, especially with songwriting. You know, it's always like lyrics are very important and things like that. And I found that I think you're right in a sense that repetitive, meditative, kind of constant loop definitely probably comes from that time when I was doing just one riff over and over and over again. Actually, a lot of my music is like that, like very cyclical.
Very catchy though. I love you've got an ear for the hook. It's really I really enjoy what you're writing and what you're creating. I can't wait to check out the album. But I want to add a couple more things about those while you're in school years, because I think it's a really interesting path. You were starting to play with all these different groups. Were you just playing bass? Were you playing and singing? Were you singing? What were you doing?
Oh, well, the first band that I joined was via another student at college, actually. Kizzy Brooke, this percussionist who I met at the RCM. She's now my best friend in the whole world. And she invited me to join her band, where she played with her cousin, who was the songwriter, Edwin Brooks. And they're in this band called The Burning Glass. And I joined them. They were my first ever band when I came to London. And very quickly it became we'd write songs together, and I would just naturally, not need, but playing the bass and singing just comes very naturally to me. And just doing one or the other is quite hard for me now, especially just singing. I mean, just playing bass is okay because I spent enough hours doing like orchestral excerpts to know that I can just play the bass on its own. But singing on its own is weird. I don't like it because you've got nothing to do with your arms, and I can't do that whole like dancing around thing that singers do. I can't do it. I look like someone's grandma. It's awful. I can't make it look good ever. So I need a double bass to like hide my awkward body. And so we do. And once I joined the Burning Glass, we started doing festivals, and we did like an album, and then I met other bands at festivals, and I started playing with like 3 or 4 other groups, I think, and they were all bass and singing because it was just a natural. Because you come in as a bassist, but they'd always go, "Oh, you sing though, right?" And you'd be like, "Yeah," and they'd be like, "Oh, can you just do this backing vocals line?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure." Probably, as long as it's not actually hard, then I have to work on it.
And I'm assuming that the Akram Khan that opportunity did that come from all those different groups that you were working with? How did that opportunity manifest?
Oh, that was a crazy one. My brother and my dad both have worked in contemporary dance before with a different company, and the composer who works with Akram and works on wrote for a few of his shows, including our one, is a good friend of my brother, and he just messaged my brother out of the blue really one day and was like, "Oh, I'm trying to put a band together for this new dance piece. I really want a double bass, but I'm not really sure who to talk to about that." And my brother was like, and he was like, "Oh, and there's an element of Indian music involved, so I don't know who to ask, because the double bass doesn't really exist in Indian music that much. There's a few people that have done it, but it's not like widely accepted instrument over there." And my brother was like, "Oh, I have no idea about that, but my sister is a double bassist," and he didn't say it, but I know he was thinking she needs work. So he just sent a few videos, probably the same ones that you've seen, like that preservations room one, that video, and I think maybe there's a video of me doing Elliot Carter somewhere on YouTube. Please don't Google it, people. Okay. It's not. It wasn't my best day, okay? But that is my favorite piece of all time. So maybe I shouldn't be too embarrassed. But Figment 3, best one. And I think it's that one and the Icarus video. My brother just sent these videos to this composer, and I got a phone call from him like the next day, and I went to meet him in London for a coffee just to like have a chat about like the vague ideas that he'd been given for this show. And then he was just like, "Oh, well, someone will get in touch with you." And then before I knew it, I was meeting Akram at Sadler's Wells Cafe, and it just happened from there. Yeah, it was madness. Yeah, I still can't believe it, really.
Well, so I've watched some clips that I can find of the dance company in action, and I don't know how to describe it. You can describe it way better than me. It's got the first thing that came to mind was like Cirque du Soleil, but dancing and not acrobatics, and that's not accurate, I don't think. But just tell like talk about what's is the show is Xenos the show that you've been doing?
Yeah.
Okay. So talk about that show and like what you do in it, and maybe just the production in general. I'll link up to it, but yeah, let folks know what that gig is like.
Yeah, it's an incredible show. It was originally sponsored by this charity called 14 to 18 Now, which is a First World War kind of commemoration charity. And they approached Akram and they just said, "Look, we know that you're planning to do a kind of swan song performance, and we would love to be involved and to possibly offer you the theme of the First World War." And Akram had been on his own kind of really personal journey with this because he'd found out through a think tank operation, I think he found out about in the First World War there were about 1.4 million soldiers from India and Bangladesh that were basically shipped over to the Allied front to fight for the West, and because they were obviously under British rule at that point. And so I think as a person with Bangladeshi descent, for Akram, it was a very kind of meaningful opportunity to tell a story that's never told. Because I mean, at school, we did the First World War at school, and we were never told that we had people fighting from India with us, you know. And I can from hearing about more of the stories behind it, because it was under colonial rule, it wasn't like they had choice. Not that anyone really had choice at that time in the war, but they definitely had no choice at all. It was kind of like the master says go, so you must go. And it's quite terrifying because we didn't know. I never knew about that. And I am the youngest person in the group, so I was the most recently at school person. And I was like, they don't teach you it. They never tell you anything about that. So it really became it's an incredibly heavy and a really important topic, I think, especially for someone like Akram to tell, because it's got that whole theme of the foreigner, because that's what Xenos means in Greek, is the foreigner. So it's that idea of being in an alien land, being treated possibly quite like an alien, and fighting a war that you don't really understand, and it's not really your war, but you're there and you're alone, and everyone's speaking different. No one speaks your language around you, and like you don't even know. You couldn't even name the country that you're in fighting in, you know, or in your language they don't know about that one. And like that whole idea of like deep isolation and trauma, and the story of Xenos is that. It's the alone soldier, and you're never sure where he is, whether he's in the trenches still, or there's moments where you're like, oh, he's back in India, and then suddenly he's in the war again in the midst of it. And it's a really like harrowing, beautiful but harrowing story. And it's all delivered by Akram. He dances solo for an hour and a half, which is an incredible feat for any dancer. Wow. But I mean, he really is just out of this world. I never thought I'd meet a real genius. It's a word that's thrown around a lot, but that man is a genuine genius. Amazing. Yeah, and then there's 5 musicians who make up the score, and you see us occasionally, but it's very mysterious, like we're ghosts or we're gods, or you never know. They hide.
I was wondering, because I couldn't see the musicians at what I was watching, so I was wondering what the setup was.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
I'm not going to give away all of our trade secrets, but we are somewhere. We're concealed somewhere about the stage, and very occasionally in quite. It's always moments where the character's feeling like the most hyper distress. We're revealed. And it's never really, you see us and you see our instruments. And I think that's one of the things I love the most about it. There is one photo you can find somewhere online, beautiful photo of Akram on the ground looking up at us. And you can see all 5 of the instruments really clear. Well, and the singer, 4 instruments and the singer. And it's a really beautiful image because we're kind of standing above him. It could be in heaven, or it could be in his mind, or just like looking down at him. And we have 2 Indian musicians and 3 UK musicians, so it's a beautiful cultural mix too.
Hey Jason, how are you? Hope you're well. Thank you for asking me about the Darius strings and what do I like about the Darius strings. Well, I've been using them for about 6 or 7 years. I use the Zyex medium set. What I like about it is that for me it has provided sort of like a really good compromise. I like the feel under my fingers is great because it's sort of like a gutty feel. The strings are thicker than generally metal strings are. And I used to play with like a Olive G before and Spiracore, so it kind of like recreates that feel. And the strings are loose, they're not super tight, like definitely a lot less tight than any of the Dario metal steel strings. And I really like that part about it, that it just like, I kind of feel like the synthetic core strings have like this gutty kind of feel. Then they have a depth to them that I really like. At the same time, they have also a nice attack, especially for pizzicato, jazz pizzicato, which is what I do mostly. And at the same time, they also bow really well. My bow sticks to them greatly. I do have to clean the strings a few times if I'm bowing, because I like to cake my bow with quite a lot of rosin. But overall, they're just a great sort of like catch-all string for me. I would say the only thing that it's perhaps not as great about them is that every 6 months I feel like they start going out of tune, and then I think that I'm playing out of tune and what's wrong with me, and it's like, oh, the strings must be wearing out, and then I change them, and then they're great again with the new set. So that's all. Love those Zyex strings, and I'm very, very happy to be the Dario artist. They're great people, and very lucky about it. Thank you so much, Jason. Take care.
Every day when I sit down to practice, I get up my phone and I boot up Modacity, which is my practicing companion, and I have a specific routine I go through, and here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what he does each day with Modacity.
What I do when I load Modacity every day is, if I don't have a playlist constructed already, what I do is I go in and I think, how long do I have to practice right now? Okay, I've got 40 minutes. Cool, I'm going to do 5 minutes on meditation, get my body state right. I'm going to do scales for 5 minutes, and I'm going to visualize, and I'm going to do this piece that I'm working on. You just set it up, see the budget, and follow the budget effortlessly by delegating that to the phone.
Letting my phone do all those logging details has been so great for my practicing. I can't recommend this app highly enough. Love it, love it, love it. Learn more at modacity.co, and we have a special offer if you go to our site for lifetime access to this app. It's so cool. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. For the music itself, is it completely written out, completely improvised somewhere in the, just like because I always find it fascinating with shows that are, it's not like you're doing Romeo and Juliet or something up there. It's a very different kind of show. And it was really interesting going to this is a different show, but maybe a few similarities. I went and I sat in the musician studio for Cirque du Soleil's Karr, right next to the bassist Derek Jones. And you would think, listening to it, that it was like super improvised, but it is like completely the same every show. And he was even saying how critical it is that it's the same, because the acrobats are listening for some of these things, for certain cues and moves. So even though you're hearing some crazy shredding, it's like, no, that's the same every night. Yeah. So I'm just curious, just what's that like with that show, your show?
There are elements just like that, because obviously especially in the moments where we're not visible, a lot of what we do can be cues for Akram. Mm-hmm. So, and there are timers involved in the show because we have a backing track too. So there's some clicks and there's some, like industry secrets. But it's a big mix really, because some of it's scored, because we do the Mozart Lacrimosa has a little feature in the show, and that part is scored. It's a new arrangement though, done by our composer Vincenzo Lamagna. And then there are some other parts of the show where he's scored them because it's for the Western musicians. So it's the easiest way. We've got baritone, saxophone, double bass and soprano, and violin. And the easiest way for Western musicians is you give them the score. And we can change little things, and we can play with articulations maybe. And I always change notes because I just can't help it. I'm a troublemaker. But all in all, it has to be the same every time, because obviously his choreography is very much timing based. But for the other two musicians, our percussionist and our Carnatic singer, it's very different for them, I think, because their whole music system works in a different way. So improvisation for them, they have an incredible way of organizing improvisation. So you give yourself loads of parameters. You have the raga, which is the serial, the mode that you can use. So already there, you've got freedom of choice of notes within a certain parameter. And then they do it with times as well. Like their tiles, they have different numbers and different choices of rhythmic structures. So they choose all of these, they make all of these decisions. and they often have words or poetry or songs from different cultures around that part of the world. So they've got all these things, but they're still improvising completely. So it's amazing because they give themselves boundaries in the most perfect, like, completely inconceivable way for the Western musicians. It's amazing. And but they're still improvising a lot.
Yeah.
But there are some things that I think if our percussionist changed, Akram would throw a stone at him, probably. There are some things that must never be changed, ever.
That is super interesting. Yeah. Okay. I was really curious about that, just based on, just like what I know about Indian music in general and the improvisatory elements. Okay, that's a cool mix, and that's one that makes sense for an art form like dance. But I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this album, and I will be, if this doesn't get out before the album release, I'll definitely help promote it and spread the word far and wide as much as I can. But I'm looking right in front of me at this, and I see you're talking about different folks that are joining you, and I see Harp on the list. So you used Harp? Okay. How did you use the harp for the album?
Oh, well, the harp is actually our support act.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because I really wanted something. I knew I had to get a support act. And I know so many, I'm so lucky. I know like almost all my friends are incredible musicians. So it was really hard to choose. But there was this one girl, Ellie Ford. She's a harpist and vocalist. And she essentially does what I do, but we're like sisters in what we do, essentially. We both play massive instruments. We both play our instruments in quite non-traditional ways. She's very much self-taught. She can do all of the classical stuff too, but she uses the harp as a percussion instrument, which is what I also do on double bass. I really couldn't think of anyone else.
My goodness! Now, tell me her name again. What's her name?
It's Ellie Ford.
Okay, great. I will look her up. My wife is a harpist.
She loves her.
Okay, so I need to. I'll make sure to link up to her in this too. But that's very cool. So the album. I want to talk about the album, but also before you're going into the studio, I think your dad gave you the advice of putting together an art book.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that. And you've got it up on your website, and folks definitely need to check it out. And it's really interesting to listen to Icarus and then to go through what you've got up there. And I identify so strongly with that because, like, I even before interviews, I kind of make my own little Jason Heath kind of quasi art. And it helps me to like think about who I'm talking to. And I like take little screenshots and put it together and do drawings, and nothing nearly as artistic as what you do. But I find that helps me with some of my projects and writing and the like. So how did that putting together the art book help you organize your musical process?
Well, it was getting closer and closer to the original the booked studio dates, and I was starting to freak out because I've done loads of recording in my life, but it's always been other people's stuff, which is such a different world, like you just go in and they tell you, I want this, and you go, yeah, all right. But if it's your own thing, you've got every decision is on you, and you have to know what you want. And I'm rubbish at that. I always know what I don't want, but I never know what I do want. And I think I probably was crying in my room one day, and Dad came in and was like, what's wrong now? And I was like, I just can't. I remember saying to him, actually, I was like, I've just got so many ideas, but I can't make anything. And I don't know what this album's going to look like. Or I don't know what it's going to sound like. Because it was just the two of us, my brother and I, going into the studio, and we had this idea that it wasn't gonna be a solo record. We were gonna add things because he's a multi-instrumentalist, so he can do whatever I ask him to do. But I was like, I don't know what it's gonna be. Like, surely I should be able to hear the whole thing in my head before I go into the studio, because you wouldn't go to an exam without doing any revision. That's how I was looking at it. And he was like, you know what you need? You need some kind of inspiration, because inspiring yourself is really hard. So you need to see something completely different. And he disappeared into Mum and Dad's room, and he came out and he had this book with him, and he gave it to me. And it was a record book, an album book that he'd made like 20 years before when he did an album with Steeleye Span, and he'd done this entire book, like really thick. Every page was like paintings and drawings, cards that he'd cut up and stuck in there, like poetry, the lyrics to all the songs that were going to be on the record, like, and it was an incredible thing. Like, I couldn't believe it. And he was like, maybe you should try doing something like this. He was like, I always found it's quite relaxing, just like sticking things on paper, and also having an aesthetic, like you said, you remind who you're talking to or who you are. It reminds you, and like what it is that you're trying to make, rather than just like thinking of it in a very technical, like, oh, how does that song go away, you know? And so he bought me a book, like a blank ring binder book, and was like, we've got loads of stuff around the house, just cut up a magazine, or here's some paint, like just go crazy. And I made the book, and I'm so glad I did. And I think if I ever do another album, I'm not sure if I will, but if I ever do another one, I definitely would want to do an album book for every album, because you get to look back on it as well, and it's such a nice thing to do.
Oh yeah, and there's the creative mind. You know, it's such a great kind of hard reset or stimulation to like work in another medium, right? And so if you're a musician, you're thinking in the world of sound, going over to the visual world, or if you're a writer, going and I mean, I think I was watching a show. This is a real tangent, but I was watching there's a new Netflix cooking show with Jon Favreau, who did this wonderful movie called Chef. Okay, if you've seen Chef, so he's following around folks who are listening. Go watch Chef; it's awesome, and it's really interesting because it just makes you so clearly realize what an art cooking is. And I love cooking too. That's another way I feel like cooking helps my writing, and my writing. I mean, it's all like tied together. But so he's going through and he's connecting with everybody whose food was featured or who was featured in the movie Chef. And one of the scenes is with Robert Rodriguez, the Sin City director, the famous Hollywood director, who is hugely into cooking and also has all of his actors for all of his movies. He has them all paint also, because that's so it's really interesting. So here he is. It's like, so he makes these like, super visually interesting movies, and I'm watching this show about cooking, and he's in there, he's just like at his pizza oven making pizzas, talking about how he has all his actors paint, and it was just really making me think about how connected all these different disciplines are.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. For any type of creative job, or any job really, having some other medium in which to express yourself is probably vital, isn't it? I think that's why I like the outdoors so much, is it's another way of being creative almost, but in a very different medium. Well,
the creativity of nature and just like being out there. One of my I'm enjoying my time out here in San Francisco. It's really fun exploring, and I'm trying to take one day a week and just go out with my camera and just take photos. And when I walk out there with my camera, all of a sudden my brain kind of goes into a different gear, and I'm just seeing the geometry of the world, and I'm seeing color composition. And then I come home and I play around with my photos in Lightroom, and it's just like, I find it really creatively interesting, and I do think it helps me with my bass practice. I think it helps me with my writing and all the other projects I do. So I think that's yet another one of the there's creativity everywhere, and so and the creative mind sees that in whatever you're doing. And I know that's true for you, because I'm just like looking and seeing how these are all, everything you're doing is kind of fitting together. And it's so fun. So like I said at the outset, there's no conceivable way we could talk about you have to come on, and anytime you're doing anything new, or just doesn't have to be anything new. I've had people on 3, 4, multiple times at this point, so I'd love to. I'd love to come back. Yeah, please do. I can't wait to check out the album. Hope that you make it back to here in San Francisco at some point, and maybe we could do something live, or if I make it out to London. I will let everybody know about this album. I love what you do. Maybe we could just end with I have a traditional question and you've already kind of talked about this, but if you could give Nina right before going to college some advice, so like 17, 18-year-old Nina, somewhere in that age range, she probably wouldn't be predicting that what you're doing right now. That would probably be startling to her, but like, what advice would you give your younger self?
Probably don't be so embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's okay to not be like a virtuoso. You're gonna be something different anyway, so you don't have to be so like embarrassed about not being like everyone else, or not being as good as everyone else, or because you're probably gonna end up doing something cool at some point. So
that's great advice. Isn't that a hard lesson to learn, though? I still struggle with this.
Well, it's impossible.
I know, and like I have my own path. I'm really happy with what I'm doing. I wouldn't wish it any other way. But I hear someone play something really awesome. I'm like, why can't I do that? And I think, stop it, Jason. Don't go down that dark path of comparison and embarrassment and not feeling good enough. But I think we all struggle with that. And maybe that's a good lesson, is just knowing that everybody's kind of got those thoughts in their mind, right? And they're kind of
definitely. Don't ever think you're the only one feeling like that, because it's definitely not the case. Yeah.
Wow. Well, we should have chatted years ago. But I'm so glad we are getting to now. Yeah, this is super fun. Is there anything else you want to touch on? I still got the recorder running. We can. I thought this was great. You're a natural at this. So, anything else you want to get out there?
No, I think that's everything.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, it feels great. I can't wait to see what's next for you. So has the show run its course now?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I think our final tour dates are in 2021.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
We're coming to Chicago next year.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, that's right. You mentioned that. Okay. So, wow, I'm amazed you carved out the time to finally get this album out there. Do you have a little break from the show right now? Is that what it is? Or
yeah, that was why. Okay. Basically, we had a gap from April to December. So I was like, I've got to do it then, because otherwise it'll never ever happen. So.
Oh no, that's gonna be nice, because when you're obviously on the road a lot with the show. I mean, is it like constant when you're out? You just go.
No, we're quite lucky in a way, because Akram has 2 very small children. So he's toured his whole life, and it's very important for him that he not be an absent father. So he makes sure when they're booking dates that it's never long. I think the longest run we ever did was a month. We did 2 1-month stints in the US. I think that's the longest we've ever gone. Usually we do like 1 or 2 weeks on and 1 week off.
Oh, that's
so it gives
great.
him a chance to get home and see kids, and in a very different way to music touring, where you're in a different place every night. Because we've got this huge set, we usually go to one place for the whole time.
Okay.
Which is nice.
Yeah, that's got to be a much better mix. Like I've had so many friends that go and do these Broadway touring shows and the like, and you're in Omaha, Nebraska, not to rip on Omaha, but for like a week, and then you go to, whatever, or like here in San Francisco, like we have so many cruise ships come in, and I think about all those musicians.
Yeah.
Like we live right next to where the cruise ships come in, so my wife and I go and we sit out there and we just think about like, you're bumping up and down the coast, it's just such a sort of groundless existence. I mean, it can be cool, but that seems like it's great that you're able to. It sounds like a really nice mix to be able
yeah,
to
we're definitely lucky.
Yeah,
we're definitely lucky in that way for sure. Yeah. Though I mean, any going away for a job is quite a strange thing.
It is.
And my problem is people always think that you're away more than you are. So like people just end up assuming that you're away. So you don't see anyone for like a month, and you're like, where are all my friends? And then they're like, oh, we all thought you were away. And you're like, oh, but sometimes I come back. Sometimes.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I've talked to a lot of folks in the jazz world that live in New York City that way, and both like socially, that's a problem, and then professionally, that can be a problem, especially in like the jazz world, where it's like, oh,
because people don't ask you.
Yeah, you're like, you never get any calls because you're like, oh, you're off doing that too, or it's like, no, I'm back. I've been back for 4 months.
I've been back. Yeah. It's really definitely a thing for sure. You have to kind of send people messages being like, hi, I'm back, just in case.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Way to go, you're the star of your own show, living it up whilst the rest of us worship down below. Way to go! If life is a film, you're the main protagonist. The story revolves around you and your stuff. Wouldn't you think I'd like to say the same for me in my
Nina, thank you so much for chatting. And folks, look her up online at ninaharries.com. Love her music and what she's doing, and we gotta have you back on the podcast soon, Nina. Thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot to me, and I'd love to hear if you have a suggestion for the show, a guest or an idea or a topic, or you name it. It'd be great to hear from you. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com. We'll put you in touch with me. Respond to each and every email, and it's just super cool to hear from people from all corners of the globe, which really I have at this point. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you follow along with the podcast. If you're not subscribed, be sure to do that. contrabassconversations.com/subscribe. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. And Mitch is making beautiful basses in the Dallas area in downtown Kilgore, Texas. Look him up at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging and archiving everything we do here on the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life in the low end of the spectrum.